Hey friends, Paisley and Glue here. And the Doctor Strange movie is coming out, and we're all very excited about it. And I thought that I would revisit the build that I made in 2017 for the first movie and kind of go over some of my construction details and give everybody some pointers if you are interested in making any of his costumes from the movies. When I was sourcing fabrics for the cape in the first movie, I had a really awful time finding that sort of checkerboard, velvet looking like material that he has sort of in patches on his cape, cloak, the cloak. So I came up with a technique that worked really well for me. I have since learned that in the original film, it is a like laser cut overlay, so it's sort of like cut into that checkerboard pattern and then like laid over another red fabric. That's great. Like if you can do that, that's fantastic. I used a combination of making my own stamp and some embossing powder made for stamp and scrapbooking and that sort of thing, and on a velveteen fabric. And that worked really well for me to make a really good facsimile of that fabric. So let's go over how I did that. Okay, so I don't have any of that red velveteen that I used for the original Doctor Strange cape, but I do have this black velvet, and this is like, it's just like a stretch polyester velvet. But I'm going to do two different tests here. I'm going to use a regular black stamping ink, and then this is it says rich cocoa, and it's sort of like a bronzy brown color. And then I also have black sparkle embossing powder and then clear embossing powder. And what I used on Doctor Strange was obviously on a red velveteen, I used red ink and then the clear embossing powder. But, this is something that might be useful for a different project, not necessarily just Doctor Strange. So I just wanted to show like what adding different colors on top with the embossing powder does for the stamping. So this was my stamp. I kind of can't believe I've kept it for all these years. Also, clearly wasn't that concerned with symmetry. So I would recommend being a little bit more careful, especially if you're trying to do a repeat, because this like did not really repeat very well. So let's do a test here. I'm just going to do like one side if my ink is not dried out, which is possible. Okay, so you want to load up your stamp with ink. And this is just EVA foam that I used, which works okay for a stamp. It's not like, it's kind of like the potato method of making stamps as opposed to using actual stamping rubber. Press that into your fabric. Did any actually transfer is the question. And then you want to make sure that your embossing powder goes on right away before it dries. So we'll see. Oh yeah, so then you can see. Look at that. Perfect. So the thing to know though is that you need to get all of the embossing powder off of the fabric before you heat set it. Otherwise you will get spots of embossed fabric that you might not want. So that is the embossing powder stuck onto the fabric. And now I'm going to take my heat gun and I'm going to hit the fabric. Now, if your fabric is polyester, please be aware that it will melt if you heat it up too much. So be really careful. And you're just looking to see the embossing powder turn not sort of creamy color. Okay, so that is that. Now your ink is pretty much dry. You've embossed you've embossed your velvet, and you can see it just adds, like when you're doing the clear with a tone on tone ink, it just adds like just a little depth and texture to the velvet, which is really interesting. Like you're basically making it kind of like a burnout velvet without actually having to do like the whole burnout process. And I just really think that there's a lot of applications here. If you like, my Maleficent dress was all this is a scrap from that. And I actually wish that I had been able to had time to do something like this on the dress, because the bottom portion I felt like was just this like solid black. And I think it would have been really cool to add sort of a detail like this to it. So that's a tone on tone with the clear embossing powder. And then I just want to show you what it looks like if you add like slightly, oh my gosh, powder everywhere. I'd recommend keeping like a big fluffy brush around too, so you can brush off excess. I just want to show like a slightly different color ink, and then that glitter. That glitter embossing powder just adds a little bit of a different feel. Okay. So this is the cocoa brown. And you can, so you're not wasting embossing powder. Like you can, when you sweep it off your fabric, you can put it onto like a blank piece of paper and then use it like a funnel and just reuse it all until you run out. Okay, so you can already see like the glitter there. Okay, so that, because it's a little bit of a contrast ink, is definitely like more noticeable on the velvet. Also, the glitter does seem like it is not like super adhered. So if you don't want glitter over everything, that is something to be aware of. I kind of want to do one more test with the black ink and the glitter and see if that does anything. It's like slightly more of a less subtle look. I also did notice, like after hitting this with the heat gun, it starts smoking a little bit. So definitely be aware of that. Don't set your house on fire, please. Yeah. So the black ink with the glitter, you can still see the shape, but it's much more subtle than it was with the ink that is slightly lighter than the fabric, which makes sense. So there are 3 options there. And I also feel like for some reason the glitter seems like it adhered better. It's the same brand of ink, but I don't really know why that happened. But I think it's pretty cool. And I would love to know if you all think of anything to use this for besides Doctor Strange, because I think it has a lot of applications and I keep like wanting to use it on things and like not quite knowing what to do. I will say I don't know if this would work as well on non-velvet fabric because you're sort of crushing the pile of the velvet. Like I said, you're kind of creating a burnout velvet effect, and I don't know that it would be quite as interesting on a non-pile fabric. That being said, I have done some tests on EVA foam using embossing powder and stamps, and that's actually really cool because you can get really subtle decorative effects without having to use paint or like apply tiny little pieces of foam or like whatever. Um, so I think there's something there, and I'd be really excited to see people kind of play with that idea in the future too. So, yeah, let me know what y'all think. And if you have any like brilliant ideas on projects to use for, I would love to hear about them.